Hi, so in today's video we are doing statistics, specifically two proportion z-test. So this is similar to doing like a one prop z-test, but this is a sample problem. So take a moment, pause the video to read the question. Now that you've read the question, let's try doing it together. So we want to determine whether counseling lowered the arrest rate. And we're using a 0.05 significance level. So we want to have a null hypothesis. When it comes to these questions, yes, it doesn't say, oh, state the null or alternative hypothesis, but you still want to state it so it's clear. But before we do that, we want to first label some things, because this is a two population, right? We have two different groups. We have the counseling and the probation. So we want to label it. So for counseling, let's call that p hat 1. And then for probation, let's call that p hat 2. And we know p hat 1 is 55 over 230. And for p hat 2, yes, that's right, 42 over 174. And you should get 0.239 and 0.241. Feel free to use your calculator. In statistics, you definitely want to use your calculator, so feel free. Now that we have that, let's claim our null hypothesis. The null hypothesis for a two proportion z-test is always going to be that the two proportions are the same. For null, on the other hand, we want to look at the question. It says we want to determine whether counseling lowered the arrest rate. So we want to determine that the arrest rate is less than the arrest rate in the other group. So that's why we put a less than sign, which is a one-tailed, not two-tailed. Now that we have that, the next step is we want to find out what our pool, we call it just p hat, but we want to use p hat to find the z-score. And here I already wrote that it is 55 plus 42 over 230 plus 174. x1 is, in this case, just 55. x2 is 42. And then n1 is the sample size for the first group, and n2 is the sample size for the second group. And once we have that, you should get 0.24. And then now that you have that, we can move on to finding the z-score. So the z-score in this case is p hat 1, which we already found, minus p hat 2 over the standard error. So in this case, it's the pooled sample proportion. So it's 0.24 times 1 minus 0.24, which is 0.8. Which is 0.76 times 1 over 230 plus 1 over 174. And all this, if you put it in the calculator, you should get negative 0.047. But what does this z-score actually mean? So once we get to this stage, the next step we want to do is find the p-value so that we could reject or fail to reject the null. So then we can conclude whether counseling lowered the arrest rate. So how do we find the p-value? Well, you would use the table or you could use technology. So in this scenario, remember that our z-score is negative 0.047. So we scanned the table, we look which one we want to choose. So this is a long table, but we want to see which table to use. So this here, notice it says positive, and here it says negative. And our z-score is negative 0.047, so we want to use this page. So we scan the z-score here, we scan it. All of these are not 0.0, and we see that we have a 0.0, and the next number is 4. So we find across where 4 is, which is here and here, and so in the middle we have 0.5. 0.484. So our p-value is equal to 0.484. And we are given that the significance level is 0.05, remember? And now we can conclude, now that we have the p-value. So clearly the p-value is greater than the significance level. So when it's greater than the significance level, we will fail to reject the null. So to write it in a clear sentence, since p-value is greater than the significance level, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Ooh, let's write it better. Oh, what? Okay. We fail to reject null, but what does this mean? We want to write it in context. If someone looks at this, they wouldn't understand what's happening. So in context, when we fail to reject null, it means that there is insufficient evidence to say that the alternative is true, because we can't reject null. So we have to say that there is insufficient evidence to conclude that null is true. That alternative is true, right? So in context, the alternative is that counseling lowered the arrest rate, remember? So we have to say there's insufficient evidence to conclude that the alternative is true. There's insufficient evidence to conclude that counseling lowered the arrest rate. And there you have it. That is how you do a 2-prop-Z test and conclude it in context, and how to find the p-value using the standard normal distribution table. And there you have it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.